Well, Fontaine is officially out, and I don't think it's controversial to say that it was really, really good. Okay, maybe it's a little controversial because I myself noticed a lot of problems with it, but still, that will be for another video. I already thought Sumeru was a good Archon quest, but so far, just 2 acts into Fontaine, it is already my favorite region by far. It's so rich in mystery, it has so many interesting storylines, and I love all the characters, and anyways, I'll deep dive into parts of the plot specifically in another video, but for now, this one is called The Genius of the Fontaine Archon Quest, and well, that's exactly what I'm going to get into. Hoyo has clearly evolved their story writing since Genshin's initial release, and I just want to talk about it and of course appreciate the changes we made. Insert obligatory spoiler warning. You know how it goes. I can't dive into the analysis without bringing up examples which will incur spoilers. So once you get it, let's begin. First, let's address perhaps one of the most objective facts that might otherwise end up forgotten. The Fontaine Archon Quest is really long. To get a scope of this, Act 1 was about 4 hours, Act 2 was about 3 hours, it would take around 7 to 8 hours to finish, give or take commentary and traveling. The entirety of the Mondstadt Archon Quest is shorter than 1 act of Fontaine. Liyue's entire Archon Quest is around 5 hours, which is barely longer than Act 1. Inazuma's around 6 hours. Mondstadt and Liyue did okay with the limited time they had, but obviously, as we know, Inazuma was incredibly rushed, and the plot felt shallow as a result. Moving to a 5-act structure in Sumeru was one of the best things they did for the story. But not only did they expand the act structure, each act is significantly longer so as to flesh out everything at the right pace. Inazuma started off okay with Acts 1 and 2 by introducing the characters and setting up the conflict, but then it all came to an abrupt end in Act 3. That problem doesn't exist in Fontaine. The pacing is much improved. Some people say that Fontaine drags on and gets a little stale at some points, but I at least think that's a better problem to have than to rush and not have enough time. So, despite the apparent staleness of certain sections of the Archon quests, I believe Fontaine is a substantial improvement. There's more time to write the story at its own pace, and the quality of said time is also much better. In summary, I'd consider fixing the worst Archon quest's biggest problem to itself be a massive improvement. The second thing that Fontaine does beyond the scope of the other Archon quests is the character development. We were given so much about the characters we dealt with. The story spends a lot of time and effort on the playable characters to get us, the players, emotionally invested in them. We were given Linny and Lynette's backstory. We were given some key Arlecchino information to give us a general understanding of her before ever meeting her. We were given Neuvlet's regret and gentle personality underneath the stern exterior, and we were given hints about the Hydro Archon's personality not being as confident as she appears to be. And then there's Navia. Navia, in my opinion, is the best written character so far in the entire game. She's easily one of the most complex and most fleshed out. Every interaction she has feels real. She's the best example of what Genshin Impact could have if they spent a lot of time investing in its playable characters. Story quests were what I would have imagined to serve this role when I first started playing this game, but alas. When you write a story and dedicate time to building your characters, you have to be smart with your choices. In Mondstadt, the bulk of character development, in the limited time it had, was about Dvalin. The story was about learning how he fell into corruption, and then we resolved to save him. It's fair enough. The story revolved around him, and we got a nice ending for him. In Liyue, we didn't spend a huge amount of time fleshing out any particular character. We learned a little bit about all the characters when they were relevant, and there was just enough to move the plot. Although, both the Shenhe and Chasm interludes were great, because they took the time to explore some key characters deeper, like Xiao, Yanfei, Shenhe, etc. Inazuma was the worst culprit of character allocation. Seriously, call me a Tepe hater, but the Archon quest was already rushed. Tepe's main purpose in the plot is to exemplify the horrors of the delusion trade. His purpose is to suffer and fuel the traveler's anger against Scaramouche and Signora. An Archon quest that is massively strapped for time, that is already rushed, where way too much of our time were spent on NPCs. Ayaka could have received the Navia treatment and become one of the best characters. Not having enough time is one thing, but another to take that little precious time and dump disproportionate amounts of it on NPCs who give little back outside of being a one-time plot device, like Swordfish 2, like the guys who lost their visions. I understand these plot devices are necessary to build narrative, but they barely have any purpose beyond that. And then there's Sumeru. Sumeru had a lot of subtle character development, like Sino's speech to Azar, Nilu taking on the ultimate risk by dancing in front of the academia, and then there's Dia's backstory and Nahida's character arc. But so far up to this point, Sumeru Acts 1 and 2 didn't really explore characters as much as they simply used them to advance the plot. We had to meet Tignari and Kale to learn about the Withering and for exposition. The Kale stuff was mostly a nod to the manga. We had to meet Dunyazad and Nilu to learn about Kusanali, and we had to meet Alhaitham to set up the Knowledge Capsules plot. Fontaine had a lot of direct focus on characters. Direct character development where the narrative squarely centers on them. And the best part is, it's not an NPC. Linny and Lynette aren't Dunyazad. Navia isn't Tepe. This is a change I believe that is long overdue in Genshin, which is direct story focus on playable characters. Not just doing a few missions with them, not just following them and watching them deal with an NPC who hogs all the spotlight. In Fontaine Act 1, Linny and Lynette were main characters. In Act 2, Navia was the main character, and especially in Navia's case, building the NPCs like Malus and Marcel complements Navia and makes her even better. However, in the Sumeru Samsara, as great as it was still written in a way where the playable characters played supporting roles to an NPC in Dunyazad. And this isn't exactly the Archon quest, but Linny's story quest was also very good for character development. I won't get into spoilers as his story quest is outside the scope of this video, but I really like this change in storytelling and hopes it continues for future content. The third point I want to make is the drama. The subversion of expectations. Plus that sweet juicy music that plays in the opera Epicles. When you look at the story developments on paper, a lot of events completely break the trend from past Archon quests. We've clashed with the Fatui on almost every imaginable scenario. Every Archon quest up to this point, countless story quests, hidden exploration objectives, open world, events, heck, even the freaking mushroom Pokemon minigame had a Fatui villain. But here in Fontaine, there's been an emphasis on the Fatui's innocence, and we've been defending them this whole time. We've had to ally with the Fatui on both acts. What this does going forward is it breaks the pattern of expectation we have on the Fatui and forces us to see them in a fairer light. Or at least us as in the Traveler. Up until this point, we were the audience, saying things like how the Fatui is responsible for pretty much everything. It's true for the most part, but misleading people into tempting assumptions is what Fontaine is all about. We were also never put on trial ourselves. Who would have thought that in the nation of justice, we'd be upstanding model citizens thus far? Most fans expected us to be charged unfairly for just about anything, but nope. The flying objects thing was misdirection. The writers knew what they were doing. They knew what the audience expected. So after that initial scare was over, the story poured on the plot twists. This makes Fontaine going forward, again, incredibly unpredictable. One act into Inazuma, and our goal to stop Raiden and end the Vision Hunt decree is established. In Mondstadt, we pretty much knew that saving Dvalin was the main goal. In Liyue, we just wanted to see the Geo Archon, but that murder mystery got in the way, and so we had to do some stuff. In Sumeru, it took a while to unravel the mystery, but in Act 2, it was becoming obvious the sages were the enemy, and we needed to rescue Nahida. Lastly, there's the usage of story details, foreshadowing, and having otherwise minor developments pay off at a later point in the story. When I first saw Halsey be selected, I was like, oh hey, that looks like the thief, but you know, Genshin has a lot of bad habit of giving us meaningless missions that serve little purpose with NPCs that serve little purpose. I mean, just look at Swordfish 2. That subplot went nowhere. Now, Sumeru Act 5 was the ultimate Archon Quest chapter in terms of payoffs. Like everybody ate in Act 5. Nilo had her shining moment, Alhaitham had his, Sino confronted Azar, Dia freed the Traveler, Raman got his revenge on the Academia, even Isak, the kid, got a great moment. Fontaine has continued that trend, but they're doing it in such an overt way that's central to the story. Vache was foreshadowed in Act 1. The thief turned out to be a main actor in the trial. Child's vision malfunctioned, and then there's the guilty ruling from the Oratrice. Linny heard a mysterious voice inside the Oratrice, which will likely be revealed later. In Sumeru, we weren't necessarily expecting every storyline to receive a payoff. Isak could have easily disappeared from Act 5 and nobody would bat an eye. But here, the foreshadowing matters. Staying true to the theme of Fontaine, it creates a great mystery going forward, while giving the audience plenty of hints to work with. Some personal comments I have. When Navia and the Traveler were splitting up, I was scared that the game would skip the trial until the Traveler arrived. I was really excited to basically play as Navia for that portion of the game. Child was hilarious as always. I didn't like him much before, but he's been growing on me in Fontaine a lot. Plus, the atmosphere of the courtroom, the tension. I patiently await the release of the trial music because I'm going to use that song a lot. Oh, right. The Traveler spoke too. They spoke in the middle of the Archon Quest.
But the truth of it, Marcel, is that you've always been Vache.
Anytime the Traveler speaks is a good moment. I want more Traveler speaking. Now, all of this together has created an Archon Quest which, although not perfect and still has plenty of flaws, has to be one of the most satisfying quests I've ever played in Genshin Impact, and I've been playing for a long time. This is a story that knows how to get its audience hooked and heavily invested. If this trend continues, and the subsequent Archon quests continue to deliver, Fontaine will easily become my best region by far. I wasn't optimistic about the story until Sumeru, but now my optimism is at a high point. Again, as I record this video, another video about Fontaine is on the way. That video will list out the flaws of the Fontaine Archon quests. I will preface, however, that despite its weaker points which I've seen and listed, it doesn't take much away from my personal enjoyment. Everyone values things differently, and some people dislike the Archon quests because they did this and this wrong. That's valid. But here, I would just like to talk about all the good things they did here. If you want to give your thoughts, then feel free. Share with me in the comments what you liked about the Fontaine Archon quests, and if there's something you don't like, well, that video is coming out very soon.
Objection! I'm Yanfei, top legal expert in Lua. The laws of Fontaine are much more different than anywhere in Teyvat. So if you'd like more analysis on that, I recommend liking and subscribing.